The warm afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of my childhood bedroom as I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes that held the remnants of my grandmother's life. The musty scent of old paper and lavender sachets filled my nostrils, mixing with the faint aroma of coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. Each box represented decades of memories, photographs, and keepsakes that Grandma Rose had carefully preserved until her peaceful passing just 3 weeks ago. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the lid of a particularly heavy box, the cardboard soft and worn from years of storage. Inside, nestled between yellowed newspaper clippings and faded family photographs, lay a leather-bound journal with a brass clasp that had turned green with age. The cover felt smooth and cool beneath my palm, and when I opened it, the familiar scent of vanilla and roses wafted up, the same perfume Grandma Rose had worn for as long as I could remember. The first page revealed my grandmother's elegant cursive handwriting, each loop and flourish as precise as I remembered from the birthday cards she'd sent me every year. But as I began to read, my stomach twisted into knots, and a chill ran down my spine despite the warm October afternoon. The words seemed to leap off the page, each sentence more shocking than the last. October 15, 2023, the entry began. Harold and Eugene came by again today, asking more questions about Emma's mental state. They want me to believe their concern is genuine, but I can see the greed in their eyes when they look at this house, at my jewelry, at everything I've worked so hard to preserve for my granddaughter. My hand shook as I read on, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest that I was certain the neighbors could hear it. Harold and Eugene were my father's brothers, my uncles who had been nothing but kind and supportive since Dad's death 5 years ago. They'd helped me through college, celebrated my graduation, and just last month had offered to help me settle Grandma's affairs. Yet here, in her own words, she was describing them as vultures circling a wounded animal. They keep suggesting that Emma might not be capable of handling an inheritance of this size, the entry continued. Harold mentioned something about her episodes in college, referring to the anxiety attacks she had during finals week. Eugene nodded along, adding that young people today are too unstable, too emotional to make sound financial decisions. They speak as if I'm not in the room, as if my mind has already started to slip. I had to set the diary down for a moment, my vision blurring with tears. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath me as I shifted my weight, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the neighbors' dog barking and children laughing in their backyard. The normalcy of those sounds felt surreal compared to the earth-shattering revelations I was uncovering. Taking a deep breath, I picked up the diary again, my fingers finding the next entry dated just 2 days later. Harold brought papers today, Grandma Rose had written. Legal documents that he claims would protect Emma from herself. He says they've consulted with a lawyer about having her declared mentally incompetent, using her college counseling records as evidence. The man actually smiled when he said it, as if destroying my granddaughter's future was some kind of favor he was doing for the family. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I gasped audibly, the sound echoing in the quiet room. My college counseling records. I'd sought help during my junior year when the stress of pre-med courses and my father's death had become overwhelming. Those sessions had been private, confidential. The fact that my uncles had somehow accessed them, or at least knew about them, felt like a violation of the deepest kind. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling me from my reading. The caller ID showed Uncle Harold's name, and for a moment, I stared at the screen, watching it light up and fade with each ring. How many times had I answered his calls with genuine affection, grateful to have family who cared about me? Now, the thought of his voice made my skin crawl. I let the call go to voicemail and returned to the diary, flipping through pages that chronicled months of increasingly desperate entries. Grandma Rose had documented every conversation, every veiled threat, every attempt my uncles had made to convince her that I was unfit to inherit her estate. The house we were sitting in was worth over $500,000, sitting as it did in one of the city's most desirable historic neighborhoods. Her investment portfolio, carefully built over decades of wise financial decisions, was worth even more. Eugene suggested I move to a nursing home today, read an entry from just 6 weeks ago. He said it with such concern in his voice, explaining how much better it would be for everyone if I weren't living alone in this big house. When I asked what would happen to the house, he quickly assured me that he and Harold would take care of everything, that Emma wouldn't have to worry about the burden of property management. My blood boiled as I read those words. The burden of property management. This house wasn't a burden, it was my heritage, filled with memories of Christmas mornings, summer afternoons spent in the garden with Grandma Rose, and countless family dinners around the mahogany table that had belonged to my great-grandmother. The late afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the room as I continued reading. The diary revealed a conspiracy that went deeper than I could have imagined. My uncles hadn't just been planning to have me declared incompetent, they'd been actively working to isolate Grandma Rose from her friends and neighbors, convincing her doctor to prescribe unnecessary medications, and even tampering with her mail to intercept important financial documents. Dr. Peterson seemed confused when I asked about the new prescriptions Eugene claimed he'd recommended, one entry revealed. When I described the pills Eugene had been bringing me, the doctor's face went white. He said he'd never prescribed anything like that, and that the combination could have been dangerous if I'd actually been taking them. Thank God I'd been pretending to take them and hiding them in my jewelry box instead. I jumped up from the floor so quickly that my vision went black for a moment, stars dancing at the edges of my sight. My legs felt unsteady as I stumbled to Grandma's antique jewelry box, a beautiful mahogany piece with mother-of-pearl inlays that sat on her dresser. My fingers fumbled with the tiny key that hung from a silver chain around the box, and when I finally managed to open it, dozens of small white pills scattered across the dresser's surface. Each pill was oval-shaped and marked with numbers I didn't recognize. The sight of them made my stomach lurch violently, and I had to grip the dresser's edge to steady myself. These weren't medications prescribed by her doctor, they were something else entirely, something my uncles had been giving her under false pretenses. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text message from Uncle Eugene. "Hey sweetheart, Harold and I are on our way over to help you pack up more boxes. We should be there in about 20 minutes. Hope you're doing okay in that big house all by yourself. 20 minutes. The message had been sent 5 minutes ago, which meant they'd be here in 15 minutes. My heart rate spiked, and suddenly the familiar creaking of the old house sounded ominous instead of comforting. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound from outside made me jump. I grabbed the diary and stuffed it into my purse along with several of the mysterious pills, my hands shaking so badly that I nearly dropped everything twice. The hardwood stairs groaned under my feet as I hurried downstairs, my mind racing with possibilities. I needed to get out of the house before they arrived, but I also needed proof of what they'd been doing. The kitchen smelled like the cinnamon tea I'd made earlier, a comforting scent that now seemed to mock the chaos of my discovery. Grandma's recipe box sat on the counter, and on impulse, I grabbed it, knowing that it contained more than just family recipes. She'd always hidden important papers there, tucked between cards for apple pie and beef stew. Sure enough, beneath a recipe for her famous chocolate chip cookies, I found a manila envelope marked with my name in her careful handwriting. Inside were legal documents that made my hands tremble even more violently. Copies of conversations she'd recorded on her old cassette player, transcripts of phone calls my uncles had made to lawyers, and most damning of all, a letter from a private investigator she'd hired to look into their activities. The investigator's report was thorough and devastating. My uncles had been planning their scheme for over 2 years, ever since they'd learned the extent of Grandma Rose's wealth. They'd researched laws regarding mental competency, consulted with lawyers who specialized in challenging wills, and even gone so far as to hire a doctor who would have been willing to falsify records about my mental state. The sound of car doors slamming outside made me freeze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Through the sheer kitchen curtains, I could see Uncle Harold's silver sedan parked in the driveway, and 2 familiar figures walking toward the front door. Their voices carried through the autumn air, too distant for me to make out words, but their tone was casual, confident, as if they were simply coming to help their grieving niece. I had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the door. My purse, now heavy with evidence, hung from my shoulder as I slipped out the back door, the screen door closing with barely a whisper. The back garden was Grandma Rose's pride and joy, filled with rose bushes and herb plants that perfumed the cool air with their fading autumn scents. My car was parked on the street behind the house, a fortunate coincidence that now felt like divine intervention. As I fumbled with my keys, I could hear the front doorbell ringing, followed by Harold's voice calling out, "Emma? We're here to help, sweetheart." The engine turned over on the first try, and I pulled away from the curb as quietly as possible, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the rearview mirror, I could see the Victorian house growing smaller, its gabled roof and wraparound porch looking like something from a fairy tale. But I now knew that not all fairy tales had happy endings, and sometimes the monsters wore familiar faces. I drove aimlessly through the tree-lined streets of our neighborhood, my mind struggling to process everything I discovered. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through my windshield, and the familiar sights of my childhood, houses where friends had lived and corners where I'd waited for school buses, now seemed foreign and threatening. Every car that passed made me wonder if my uncles were following me. Every ring of my phone sent jolts of anxiety through my chest. Eventually, I found myself in the parking lot of Morrison's Diner, a 24-hour restaurant where Grandma Rose had taken me for pancakes every Saturday morning when I was little. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, casting pink and blue light across the cracked asphalt. The familiar sight should have been comforting, but instead it reminded me of all the Saturday mornings that would never happen again, all the conversations with Grandma Rose that I'd taken for granted. Inside the diner, the air was thick with the smell of coffee and bacon grease, tinged with the antiseptic scent of industrial cleaning products. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, their surfaces cracked and patched with duct tape, and a jukebox in the corner played classic rock songs at a volume just loud enough to mask conversations. I chose a booth in the back corner, one that gave me a clear view of both the entrance and the parking lot. My hands still trembled as I spread the contents of Grandma's envelope across the table's formica surface. The private investigator's report was even more detailed than I'd initially realized, documenting months of surveillance and research. His name was Marcus Webb, and according to his letterhead, he was a former police detective with 30 years of experience in financial crimes. The photographs he'd included were like something from a crime thriller. Uncle Harold and Uncle Eugene meeting with a man identified as Dr. Richard Castellanos, a doctor who'd been stripped of his license 3 years earlier for falsifying medical records. Another photo showed Eugene leaving a pharmacy with a bag that, according to the investigator's notes, contained medications that had been prescribed under a false name. But the most chilling evidence was a transcript of a phone conversation Webb had recorded between my uncles. The date stamp showed it had been made just 1 week before Grandma Rose's death. The old lady's getting suspicious, Harold's voice was transcribed as saying, "She's been asking too many questions about the pills, and she's started locking her bedroom door at night." "We need to move faster," Eugene had replied. "If she changes her will or talks to a lawyer, we're screwed. Maybe it's time to consider other options." "What kind of other options?" "You know what kind." "She's 87 years old, Harold. A fall down those stairs, a medication interaction, hell, even just the stress of worrying about Emma's future could trigger a heart attack." The words swam in front of my eyes, and I felt bile rise in my throat. They weren't just planning to steal my inheritance, they'd been contemplating murder. My own grandmother's murder. The diner's fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, and the smell of fried food made my stomach churn violently. "You okay, honey?" The waitress appeared at my table, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her name tag read Dorothy, and she was holding a coffee pot and wearing an expression of genuine concern. "I'm fine," I managed to say, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "Could I just have some water, please?" Dorothy studied my face for a moment, then set the coffee pot down and slid into the booth across from me. "Sweetheart, I've been working this job for 23 years, and I can tell when someone's in trouble. You look like you've seen a ghost." The kindness in her voice broke something inside me, and tears began streaming down my cheeks before I could stop them. I said between sobs, "I think my family tried to kill my grandmother." Dorothy's eyes widened, but she didn't move away or dismiss my words as hysteria. Instead, she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers, her skin warm and calloused from years of honest work. "Honey, that's a serious accusation. Have you called the police?" I looked down at the papers scattered across the table, evidence of a conspiracy so elaborate and evil that I still couldn't fully believe it was real. "I don't know if they'll believe me. My uncles are respected members of the community. Harold owns a successful accounting firm, and Eugene is a deacon at his church. Who's going to believe that they're capable of something like this?" "The evidence believes you," Dorothy said firmly, gesturing to the photographs and documents. "And you'd be surprised how often the most respectable-looking people are hiding the darkest secrets." My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout our conversation, and when I finally looked at it, I saw 17 missed calls and 12 text messages, all from Harold and Eugene. The messages started out concerned and loving but gradually became more insistent and demanding. "Where are you?" "We're worried sick," read the first text from Harold. "Emma, please call us back. It's not safe for you to be alone right now," Eugene had written. But the most recent message, sent just 5 minutes ago, made my blood run cold. "We know you took something from the house. We need to talk. This is bigger than you understand, and if you're not careful, you could get hurt." Dorothy read the message over my shoulder and whistled low. "That sounds like a threat to me, honey. I think it's time to call the police." My phone rang again, and this time it wasn't one of my uncles. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, a professional male voice greeted me. "Miss Parker? This is Detective James Rodriguez with the city police. I'm calling because we've received some concerning information about threats made against you and your late grandmother. Is there somewhere safe we can meet to discuss this?" The relief that washed over me was so intense that I nearly started crying again. "How did you know?" I asked. "Your grandmother hired a private investigator who's been working with our financial crimes unit for the past month. When Marcus Webb heard about Mrs. Parker's death, he became concerned that her suspicions were correct and that you might be in danger." Detective Rodriguez's voice was calm and reassuring, the kind of steady presence that made you feel like everything might actually be okay. He suggested meeting at the police station, but when I explained that I was afraid my uncles might be watching for my car, he offered to send an officer to escort me. 20 minutes later, Officer Sarah Chen arrived at the diner in an unmarked car. She was a petite Asian woman who looked to be in her early 30s, with intelligent dark eyes and an air of quiet competence that immediately put me at ease. Dorothy insisted on packing me a sandwich and a thermos of coffee for the road, as if I were embarking on a long journey instead of just going to the police station. The police station smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee, with fluorescent lights that cast everything in harsh, unforgiving detail. Detective Rodriguez was exactly what I'd imagined from his voice, a tall, serious man with graying temples and kind eyes that had probably seen too much human cruelty over the years. His office was small and cluttered with case files, but he cleared a space on his desk for the evidence I'd brought. "Mrs. Parker was a remarkable woman," he said as he carefully examined the diary and the private investigator's report. "When she first approached Marcus Webb, we honestly thought she might be suffering from paranoia or early-stage dementia. Elderly people sometimes become suspicious of family members without cause. But Webb's investigation revealed a pattern of behavior that was deeply concerning." He opened a file folder and showed me additional photographs and documents that made my stomach drop. Bank records showing that Harold had been slowly draining one of Grandma Rose's savings accounts. Forged signatures on investment documents that would have transferred ownership of her stock portfolio to Eugene. Most damning of all, a recording device that Webb had planted in Grandma's kitchen, which had captured hours of conversations between my uncles planning my downfall. "They knew she was onto them," Detective Rodriguez explained. "The accelerated timeline, the increasingly dangerous suggestions about her healthcare, the pressure to move her into a nursing home where they could control her more completely. Your grandmother's death might have appeared natural, but given everything we've uncovered, we're treating it as a suspicious death pending autopsy results." The word autopsy hit me like a physical blow. The idea of Grandma Rose's body being examined, dissected, treated like evidence in a criminal case, made me feel sick. But I also felt a burning need for justice, for the truth to come out no matter how painful the process might be. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we arrest your uncles and charge them with conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and potentially attempted murder. The evidence your grandmother gathered, combined with Webb's investigation, gives us more than enough for warrants." As if on cue, Detective Rodriguez's phone rang. He answered it with a brisk "Rodriguez," then listened for several minutes, his expression growing increasingly grim. When he hung up, he turned to me with an apologetic look. "Your uncles have reported you as a missing person," he said. "They're claiming that you're having a mental health crisis and might be a danger to yourself or others. They've provided the police with what they claim are your medical records showing a history of instability." My hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms hard enough to leave marks. "Those records are private." "How did they get them?" "We're looking into that." But in the meantime, they're asking for a welfare check, and they've suggested that you might have taken something from your grandmother's house that doesn't belong to you. The audacity of it took my breath away. They were using the same tactics they'd planned to use against Grandma Rose, painting me as mentally unstable and untrustworthy. But this time, they'd underestimated their opponent. This time, there was evidence. Detective Rodriguez stood up and walked to his office window, which looked out onto the parking lot where patrol cars sat under the yellowish glow of sodium lights. The sky had darkened while we'd been talking, and the first stars were beginning to appear between the clouds. The normalcy of evening settling over the city felt surreal given the magnitude of what we were discussing. "Miss Parker," he said without turning around, "I need you to understand that your uncles are desperate people, and desperate people do dangerous things. We're going to arrest them tonight, but until we do, you're not safe. Do you have somewhere you can stay? Somewhere they wouldn't think to look for you?" I thought about my small apartment across town, the one I'd been renting since college. Harold and Eugene both had keys, supposedly for emergencies. They'd helped me move in, had celebrated housewarming parties there, had made themselves so much a part of my life that there was nowhere I could go that they wouldn't think to look. "My best friend Sarah lives about an hour away," I said finally. "I could stay with her." "Good. Officer Chen will escort you to pack a bag and then make sure you get there safely. But first, there's something else you need to know." He returned to his desk and pulled out another file folder, this one thicker than the others. Inside were more bank records, these ones going back 5 years to just after my father's death. The numbers made my head spin. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moved between accounts, investment properties purchased under shell companies, and most shocking of all, a life insurance policy on my father that had paid out nearly $1 million. "Your father's death wasn't accidental," Detective Rodriguez said quietly. "We believe your uncles have been planning this for years, possibly even before your father died." "The brake failure that caused his car accident?" "Our investigators found evidence that the brake lines had been tampered with." The room seemed to tilt around me, and I gripped the arms of my chair so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My father had been driving home from work on a rainy Thursday evening when his brakes failed on a steep hill. The police had ruled it a tragic accident, the result of old brake lines finally giving out. I'd never questioned that explanation because why would I? Who questions whether their family members are capable of murder? "They killed him for the insurance money," I whispered, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. "And then they spent 5 years getting close to me and Grandma Rose so they could steal everything else." "We believe so, yes. Your grandmother started to piece it together about 6 months ago. That's when she hired Marcus Webb. She was trying to protect you, Emma, but she was also trying to get justice for your father." Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time since entering the police station, they weren't tears of fear or confusion. They were tears of rage, pure and burning. My father had been a good man, a gentleman who'd worked hard to provide for his family and who'd never hurt anyone in his entire life. The idea that his own brothers had murdered him for money was almost too evil to comprehend. "I want to help," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Whatever you need me to do to make sure they pay for this, I'll do it." Detective Rodriguez smiled for the first time since I'd met him, and it transformed his entire face. "I was hoping you'd say that. Because we're going to need your cooperation to make sure we get them on all the charges." The plan he outlined was both simple and terrifying. I would return to my apartment, acting as if I'd simply been out running errands and hadn't seen their calls and messages. Officer Chen would be positioned nearby, and the apartment would be under surveillance. When Harold and Eugene inevitably showed up to confront me about what I'd taken from Grandma's house, they'd be recorded confessing to their crimes. "What if they don't confess?" I asked. "They will," Detective Rodriguez said with confidence. "Guilty people always want to explain themselves, to justify what they've done. They'll try to convince you that they were protecting you, that your father and grandmother would have wanted this. And when they do, we'll have them." The drive back to my apartment felt like traveling through a dream, everything familiar yet somehow transformed by the knowledge I now carried. Officer Chen followed at a discreet distance while I parked in my usual spot and walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my front door. The hallway smelled like the Thai food from the restaurant downstairs, a comforting scent that reminded me of normal evening routines and simple pleasures. My apartment looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, but everything felt different. The family photographs on my mantel, which had always been sources of comfort, now seemed like evidence in a criminal case. There was my father at my high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders, his smile proud and genuine. There was Grandma Rose at my college graduation, tears in her eyes as she hugged me. And there, in the corner of one photo, were Harold and Eugene, looking like loving uncles celebrating their niece's achievements. I'd been home for maybe 20 minutes when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Heavy, purposeful footsteps that I recognized immediately. My heart rate spiked, but I forced myself to breathe slowly and deeply. Detective Rodriguez had assured me that I was safe, that help was just seconds away if I needed it. The knock on my door was firm but not aggressive, the knock of concerned relatives checking on their troubled niece. "Emma?" Harold's voice called through the wood. "Sweetheart, we know you're in there. We've been worried sick about you." I opened the door and was struck by how normal they looked. Harold was wearing his usual khaki pants and button-down shirt, his gray hair neatly combed and his face arranged in an expression of loving concern. Eugene stood beside him in his church clothes, holding a casserole dish that probably contained one of his wife's famous tuna noodle casseroles. "There you are," Eugene said, pushing past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "We've been calling you all day. When you didn't answer, we thought something terrible had happened." "I was just out," I said, closing the door behind them and trying to keep my voice casual. "Running errands, you know." I didn't realize my phone was on silent. Harold studied my face intently, and I wondered if he could see the guilt there, the knowledge of what I discovered. "Emma, we need to talk about what happened at your grandmother's house today. Mrs. Henderson next door said she saw you leaving through the back garden like you were running from something." "Mrs. Henderson?" "Of course. The neighborhood busybody who spent her days watching everyone else's business from behind her lace curtains. I should have known she'd report my hasty exit to anyone who asked." "I wasn't running from anything," I said. "I just realized I had an appointment I'd forgotten about." Eugene set the casserole dish on my kitchen counter and turned to face me, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Emma, honey, we know you took something from the house. We're not angry, we understand that you're grieving and not thinking clearly. But you need to give it back." "I don't know what you're talking about." "The diary," Harold said flatly. "Your grandmother's diary. And probably some other things. We know she was writing down a lot of nonsense in her final months, making up stories about people who loved her. The dementia was getting worse, Emma. She wasn't thinking clearly." The casual way he dismissed Grandma Rose's mental faculties, the same way he'd planned to dismiss mine, made my anger flare white-hot. But I forced myself to remain calm, to play the role of the confused and grieving granddaughter. "What diary?" I asked. "I didn't see any diary." Eugene moved closer, and for the first time, I noticed that his kind, avuncular expression had slipped slightly. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes were cold and calculating. "Emma, we're trying to help you here, but you need to cooperate. That diary contains some very hurtful lies about Harold and me. If anyone were to read it, they might get the wrong idea about our intentions." "What kind of lies?" "Crazy stories about us trying to steal from her, or hurt you," Harold said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "The kind of stories that a confused old woman might make up when her mind starts to go. But harmful stories nonetheless." They were doing exactly what Detective Rodriguez had predicted, trying to discredit Grandma Rose while simultaneously confirming that they knew exactly what was in the diary. I felt a surge of satisfaction at how perfectly they were falling into the trap. "I still don't understand what this has to do with me," I said. "Even if there was a diary, even if Grandma Rose wrote some things that weren't true, why would that matter?" Eugene and Harold exchanged a look, and I could see them making a decision. When Eugene turned back to me, his mask of concern had slipped even further. "It matters, Emma, because we've worked very hard to take care of this family after your father died. We've made sacrifices, invested time and money in making sure you and your grandmother were provided for. And we'll be damned if some senile old woman's fantasies are going to destroy everything we've built. Built? I repeated. What exactly have you built? Security, Harold said. Financial security for this family. Your father was terrible with money, Emma. If it weren't for us stepping in after he died, you never would have been able to afford college. Your grandmother never would have been able to maintain that house. The lies came so easily to them, delivered with such conviction that I almost found myself wondering if they believed their own version of events. But I knew the truth now. I knew about the insurance money they'd collected after murdering my father. I knew about the accounts they'd been draining and the inheritance they'd been planning to steal. I'm grateful for everything you've done, I said carefully. But I'm still not sure what you're asking me to do. Give us the diary, Eugene said, his voice now openly threatening. And any other papers you might have taken. Photos, documents, anything that could be misinterpreted by people who don't understand the situation. And if I don't? Harold's expression hardened completely, and for a moment I saw the man who'd been capable of murdering his own brother. Then we'll have to take steps to protect ourselves and this family. We'll have you declared mentally incompetent, Emma. We have documentation of your mental health issues in college, and it wouldn't be hard to have you committed for evaluation. Once you're in the system, once you have that kind of record, no one will ever believe anything you say about us. You can't do that. We can and we will, Eugene said. We have friends, Emma. Lawyers, doctors, judges. People who understand that sometimes you have to make hard decisions for the greater good of the family. The threat hung in the air between us like poison gas, and I realized that even if I gave them what they wanted, even if I handed over every piece of evidence Grandma Rose had collected, they would never let me live with the knowledge of what they'd done. They'd already killed 2 people to get what they wanted. What was one more? You killed him, I said quietly. You killed my father. The words seemed to surprise them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Harold laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. Your father killed himself, Emma. With his drinking, his reckless driving, his complete inability to manage money or responsibility. We just helped the inevitable along a little bit. The brake lines, I continued. You cut the brake lines on his car. Eugene shrugged as if we were discussing the weather. It was quick. He probably didn't even know what was happening. Better than letting him drink himself to death over the next 10 years and drag everyone else down with him. And Grandma Rose? Did you kill her too? Your grandmother died peacefully in her sleep, Harold said. Helped along by some medications that made sure she didn't suffer. We're not monsters, Emma. We don't take pleasure in causing pain. But sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the good of the family. They were confessing, actually confessing to double murder as if they were discussing household chores. The casual way they discussed taking human lives made my skin crawl, but it also filled me with a fierce satisfaction. Every word they spoke was being recorded, every admission of guilt captured for the jury that would eventually convict them. And now you want to kill me too, I said. We don't want to, Eugene said, and he actually sounded sincere. Your family, Emma. We've watched you grow up, celebrated your achievements, been proud of the young woman you've become. But you know too much now, and we can't let sentiment interfere with practical necessities. Harold reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. This will be quick and painless, he said. Just like your grandmother. We'll make it look like a suicide, maybe leave a note about how grief over losing her drove you to take your own life. People will understand. They'll feel sorry for you. The casual way he discussed my murder, as if it were a kindness he was doing for me, made bile rise in my throat. But I also felt a surge of triumph because I knew that help was on the way, that every word of their confession had been recorded. As if summoned by my thoughts, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside my apartment, followed by a sharp knock on the door. Police! Open up! The effect on my uncles was instantaneous and satisfying. Harold dropped the vial, which shattered on my hardwood floor, filling the air with the sharp smell of chemicals. Eugene's face went completely white, and he stumbled backward until he hit my kitchen counter. "You set us up," Harold said, his voice filled with rage and disbelief. "I had help," I replied, backing away from them toward the door. "Grandma Rose left me everything I needed to destroy you." The door burst open, and Detective Rodriguez entered, followed by 3 uniformed officers. The sight of them, solid and real and representing justice, made my knees go weak with relief. "Harold Parker and Eugene Parker," Detective Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the full authority of the law, "you're under arrest for the murders of Thomas Parker and Rose Parker, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted murder." The next few minutes passed in a blur of handcuffs, Miranda rights, and the controlled chaos of a crime scene being secured. Harold and Eugene were led away in separate patrol cars, their faces masks of shock and defeated rage. Eugene's wife's casserole dish sat abandoned on my counter, a mundane reminder of how evil could hide behind the facade of family concern. Detective Rodriguez stayed behind to take my official statement and to collect the shattered vial that Harold had dropped. The chemical smell was making me nauseous, so Officer Chen opened all the windows to air out the apartment. The cool night breeze carried the sounds of the city going about its normal evening routine, people heading home from work, families gathering for dinner, children playing in nearby parks. The normalcy of it felt surreal after the nightmare of the past few hours. "You did great," Detective Rodriguez said as he sealed the broken glass and remaining liquid into an evidence bag. "I know that couldn't have been easy, listening to them confess to murdering your family members." I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket that Officer Chen had brought from my bedroom, and tried to process everything that had happened. I keep thinking about all the times they comforted me after Dad died, all the family dinners and birthday celebrations. How could they sit across from me at Thanksgiving dinner knowing they'd killed him? "Sociopaths are remarkably good at compartmentalizing," Rodriguez explained. "They can commit horrific acts and then function normally in social situations because they don't experience guilt or empathy the way normal people do. To them, your father's murder was just a business decision, and maintaining their relationship with you and your grandmother was just another aspect of their long-term planning." The forensics team arrived to collect evidence from the scene, their cameras flashing as they documented everything. I watched them work and wondered how many other families had been torn apart by similar betrayals, how many people had died at the hands of those who claimed to love them. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we build the case for trial," Rodriguez said. "We have their confessions on tape, we have the evidence your grandmother collected, and we have Marcus Webb's investigation. It's going to be a strong case, Emma. They're going to pay for what they've done." Over the following weeks, the story of my uncle's crimes dominated local news coverage. "Family murder plot exposed by grandmother's diary," read the headline in the city newspaper. "Beloved church deacon charged with double murder," announced another. The details that emerged during the investigation painted a picture of greed and calculation that shocked even seasoned law enforcement officers. The autopsy results confirmed that Grandma Rose had been poisoned with a combination of medications that mimicked the symptoms of natural death in elderly patients. The pills Eugene had been bringing her contained a cocktail of drugs that would have slowly shut down her organs while making it appear that she was simply declining due to old age. The fact that she'd been pretending to take them while secretly documenting his visits had literally saved her life, at least temporarily. The investigation into my father's death revealed even more disturbing details. Harold and Eugene had been planning his murder for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to make it look accidental. They'd researched brake failures, studied accident statistics, and even practiced the technique on a junk car they'd purchased specifically for that purpose. The insurance payout had been their first major score, but they'd always intended for it to be just the beginning. Marcus Webb, the private investigator, became something of a local hero for his role in exposing the plot. He visited me at my apartment one afternoon, a kind-faced man in his 60s with the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades dealing with human darkness. "Your grandmother was one of the bravest people I've ever met," he told me over coffee at my kitchen table. "When she first approached me, she knew she was putting herself in danger. But she also knew that if she didn't act, you'd be their next victim." He showed me more of the evidence he'd collected, including photographs of Harold and Eugene meeting with various accomplices. The scope of their conspiracy was staggering. They'd cultivated relationships with corrupt medical professionals, bribed clerks to access confidential records, and even hired actors to pose as concerned neighbors who could testify to my supposed mental instability. They were going to frame you for your grandmother's murder, Webb explained. The plan was to have you declared incompetent, then claim that you'd become violent and unpredictable. They would have been your legal guardians, controlling your inheritance while you rotted in a psychiatric facility. The thought of it made me shudder. I could picture myself trapped in some sterile institution, trying desperately to convince doctors and nurses that I was sane while Harold and Eugene played the role of grieving relatives dealing with a tragic family situation. The trial began 6 months later, in a courtroom packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and family friends who couldn't believe that the men they'd known for years were capable of such evil. Harold's wife sat in the front row behind the defense table, her face a mask of devastation and disbelief. Eugene's wife and children had left town weeks earlier, unable to cope with the shame and media attention. I took the stand on the third day of testimony, wearing a conservative blue dress that the prosecutor had suggested would make me appear trustworthy and sympathetic. The defense attorneys had already tried to paint me as an emotionally unstable young woman who'd misinterpreted innocent family conversations, but the evidence against their clients was overwhelming. "Miss Parker," the prosecutor asked, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your uncles prior to discovering your grandmother's diary?" I looked across the courtroom at Harold and Eugene, sitting next to their lawyers in expensive suits that couldn't disguise the defeat in their eyes. "I loved them," I said simply. "They were the only family I had left after my father died. I trusted them completely." "And how do you feel about them now?" The question hung in the air for a long moment while I considered my answer. "How do you describe the feeling of discovering that the people who raised you, who celebrated your birthdays and graduations, who comforted you through grief, were actually the ones who'd caused that grief in the first place?" "I feel sorry for them," I said finally. "Not because of what's happening to them now, but because of what they chose to become. They had everything they needed to live happy, meaningful lives, but they chose greed and murder instead." The defense attorneys did their best to discredit my testimony and the evidence, suggesting that Grandma Rose had been suffering from dementia and that the private investigator had manufactured evidence to justify his fees. But the jury wasn't buying it. The recorded confessions were too clear, the physical evidence too conclusive, the pattern of behavior too consistent to be explained away. Harold was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Eugene, who had negotiated a plea agreement in exchange for testifying against his brother, received life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Both men were also ordered to pay restitution that would cover the funeral expenses and legal fees associated with their crimes. On the day the verdicts were announced, I stood outside the courthouse surrounded by reporters asking for my reaction. The October air was crisp and clean, reminding me of the afternoon when I'd first discovered Grandma Rose's diary. Almost exactly 1 year had passed since that life-changing moment. "Justice has been served," I told the cameras. "My father and grandmother can rest in peace knowing that their killers will spend the rest of their lives paying for their crimes." But the real victory wasn't the prison sentences or the media coverage. The real victory was that I was alive, that I'd survived their plot to destroy me, and that I could honor my family's memory by living the life they'd wanted me to have. I moved out of my apartment the following month, unable to continue living in the place where Harold and Eugene had confessed to their crimes. Instead, I moved back into Grandma Rose's Victorian house, the house that had been the catalyst for so much evil but was also filled with decades of loving memories. The garden that Grandma Rose had tended so carefully was beginning to bloom again after a winter of neglect. I spent my evenings there, planting new flowers and pulling weeds, finding peace in the simple act of nurturing life from soil. Sometimes I would sit on the wraparound porch and read from her diary, not the entries about Harold and Eugene's crimes, but the earlier ones filled with stories about my childhood and observations about life and love. "Emma learned to ride her bicycle today," read one entry from when I was 6 years old. "She wobbled and fell twice, skinning her knees, but she got right back up and tried again." That's the Parker spirit, the strength that will carry her through whatever challenges life brings. Reading those words, I felt her presence with me in a way that had nothing to do with ghosts or supernatural beliefs. She lived on in the values she'd taught me, in the courage she'd shown in protecting me, and in the love that had motivated her to risk everything to ensure my safety. the house gradually filled with new memories to balance out the dark ones.
Sarah, my best friend, became a frequent visitor, helping me redecorate rooms and plan dinner parties.
Marcus Webb and Detective Rodriguez both stopped by occasionally, checking on my well-being and updating me on related cases they were working on. Even Dorothy, the waitress from the diner, came by one afternoon with a homemade apple pie and stayed for coffee. "You've got yourself a beautiful home here," she said as we sat in the kitchen where Grandma Rose had baked countless meals for our family. "But more than that, you've got yourself a beautiful life. Not everyone who goes through what you went through comes out the other side with their heart intact." She was right. I could have emerged from this experience bitter and suspicious, unable to trust anyone or believe in goodness. Instead, I felt more grateful than ever for the genuine love and kindness that existed in the world. The evil of Harold and Eugene hadn't destroyed my faith in humanity, it had actually strengthened it by showing me how many good people were willing to fight for justice and truth. One evening, as autumn was giving way to winter, I was sorting through the last of Grandma Rose's belongings when I found a sealed envelope hidden in her bedroom closet. My name was written on the front in her familiar handwriting, and inside was a letter dated just 1 week before her death. "My dearest Emma," it began, "if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass, and Harold and Eugene have succeeded in their evil plans. But I want you to know that even in death, I am not defeated, because I have faith that the truth will come to light and justice will be served. You are stronger than you know, sweetheart, stronger than they could ever imagine. You have your father's kind heart and your great-grandmother's fierce spirit, and no amount of money or power can corrupt or destroy those qualities. Whatever they do to me, whatever lies they tell about you, remember that love always triumphs over evil in the end. Live boldly, Emma. Love deeply. Trust carefully, but don't let their betrayal make you afraid to trust at all. The world needs people like you, people who choose compassion over greed and truth over convenience. Make me proud by becoming the woman I know you can be." The letter was signed with her name and sealed with a lipstick kiss, the same coral shade she'd worn for as long as I could remember. I pressed the paper to my chest and felt her love surrounding me like a warm embrace, stronger than death and more enduring than any evil that had tried to destroy our family. As I write this, 2 years have passed since that October afternoon when I first opened Grandma Rose's diary. Harold died in prison 6 months ago, killed by another inmate who'd learned about his crimes against family members. Eugene is still serving his sentence, and according to prison records, he's become a model prisoner who spends his time in the library reading books about redemption and forgiveness. I've started a foundation in my father's and grandmother's memory, providing legal assistance to elderly people who suspect they're being financially abused by family members. The foundation has already helped dozens of families, and every case we resolve feels like another small victory against the kind of evil that destroyed my uncles. The Victorian house has been restored to its former glory, its wraparound porch welcoming friends and neighbors, its garden blooming with the flowers Grandma Rose planted and the new varieties I've added in her memory. Sometimes, when the evening light filters through the lace curtains just right, I can almost see her sitting in her favorite chair, smiling at the life I've built from the ashes of the nightmare she helped me escape. Her diary sits on my bookshelf now, not as evidence of crimes committed, but as testimony to the power of love and courage in the face of evil. She saved my life with her words, her careful documentation, and her refusal to go quietly into the darkness that Harold and Eugene had planned for our family. I think about her every day, and I carry her memory with me like a shield against any future betrayals that life might bring. Because I learned something important from this experience: evil may be cunning and patient and willing to wear the mask of love, but goodness is stronger. Truth is stronger. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, we get the chance to prove it.